Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our united progressive movement. As we've been doing in our newest format, we have switched over to these one-on-one interviews so that we can find out, rosebuds like you, what your top priorities are in the political realm. With us today, we have John Michael Manzi. You may remember him from our December Democratic debate reaction. John, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today about your top priorities. When he had signed up, he had told me that his top three priorities were Medicare for all, climate change, and foreign policy. I wanted to start on Medicare for all. John, why did this become a top priority for you today? And what do you think is the essence of what Medicare for all means to you?
Well, it became a top priority probably back in 2016 election in the primary, because I had actually never heard of the concept before, and I think most people hadn't heard of it before. Um, but digging more into it, it just seemed to make the most sense. And then you hear, you know, like horror stories with the American healthcare system compared to other healthcare systems, and I'm lucky enough to not have had one of those stories yet. But seeing people have to go through this system, people with insane medical debt, people who don't even go to the doctor. That was probably why it became a top priority. And you said,
Yeah,
what do I think Medicare for all is?
yeah.
Yes. So to me, it's just a simple single payer healthcare system. Everyone is covered. There's no public option. You can't opt out of it. And yeah, I would support supplemental private insurance, but I think extensively all of the primary care should be covered under a Medicare for all single payer system.
Okay. Yeah, I totally hear you on the morality of having universal health care and significantly lowering the cost of our healthcare system. One of the things I wanted to get into and clarify is why single payer, in your mind, is the best way forward to achieve universal health care.
Well, first of all, it's the cheapest option. Single payer. Every other country who does single payer spends way less than we do. You don't allow any room for the private insurance to get into our government and write any more of the laws going forward, because that's been the main reason why we don't have universal healthcare right now, is that they've had a seat at the table. So when you cut them off from the government process, it would certainly help to preserve the healthcare system as long as possible. And also, it's much harder to repeal if you have a single payer system, because universal programs are obviously superior in terms of how long they last and their popularity.
Okay. Yeah, so I hear you that the top concerns are cost, influence, and truly having the administration of it be simpler. For my question for you is, do you think a public option that is offered to everyone in the public with no buy-in does not achieve those goals of universality and helping to lower costs?
No, because you need the biggest risk pool possible to lower the cost in an insurance system. And when you have a public option, people that are going to buy the public option are the people that need it the most. And those include elderly people, and sick people, and poor people. And when they use more of the money in the healthcare system, without the people who are healthy paying money into the system, because that's how any insurance is funded. The people who don't use it and pay into it, they largely fund that system. So when you only have the people who are going to be using healthcare the most, without the people who aren't using it as much paying into the system, you're going to have an underfunded public option, and that's going to be susceptible to the right saying, "Oh, this failed, and now we're going to try and repeal it because Medicare for all failed, even if it's not actually Medicare for all." So it's the obvious solution for me is a universal program. Everyone pays in, big risk pool, and it lowers the costs for everyone.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with you that you do need to increase the risk pool and have everyone being paid into the system. one of the things that I have heard from people who support Yang, like myself, or Tulsi Gabbard with her single payer plus plan, is that they don't see the need to abolish the private insurance, but they do think that everyone should pay into the system that's funding the public option
Yeah.
through the taxes. Do you think that is infeasible compared to a single payer solution? And why do you think there is that gap?
I don't think it's infeasible. I think any system where everyone is paying into it is far better than any system that we have now, and I would gladly support it. It's just my personal preference to have it cover everybody because I'd like to keep private insurance as far away from government as possible at this point. And what was the second question again?
Yeah, it was more that, like, what is the gap between single payer and these hybrid single payer solutions that the single payer plus solution that Tulsi has, or the quote unquote Medicare for all system that Yang is proposing?
Oh, yeah, I would say um, the main gap is just that there's duplicative insurance that's usually allowed. I know that's allowed in Tulsi's plan. I'm not sure about Yang's plan. Um, but duplicative insurance is probably not a good idea if you want to guarantee everyone health care. But as long as everyone pays into the system, I'm pretty much fine with it. Although Medicare for all is my preferred option.
I can hear you there. I personally prefer using the public option as a transitionary vehicle and having everyone pay in, because I think it's harder to actually get to single payer unless you have more people already on Medicare. Because when you're trying to transition these employees, I know Bernie's plan has like a 5-year period where they basically give them money to be able to transition. I just think that it's a less natural transition. You're basically saying there's firings or layoffs every year because it's a 4-year transitionary period that his plan has, and then you're having to pay everyone off in that transition. While public option, you have this natural, not regression, but decreasing in size of a company, so it's more natural layoffs. People can start looking for jobs rather than saying, okay, am I going to be in the year 1 firings, or am I going to be in the year 2 firings, or am I going to be, etc. in those
Yeah.
firings? But I strongly agree that we do need any push in that direction. One of the things I've heard from critics of systems like universal healthcare is that if we start paying for everyone's healthcare, it's going to bloat costs because there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system. Do you believe that there are any specific types of reforms we need to make cost-wise to healthcare before we try and enact a universal insurance program?
In terms of say no because Medicare is by far the most efficient program. The reason that there's so much inefficiency is because private insurance companies, only about 80% of that money in private insurance actually goes to healthcare. I think that was one of the laws under Obamacare. Under Medicare for all, that efficiency number is about 97 to 98%, which means it's really efficient and there's no overhead or administrative costs like there are in the private insurance program. So I think going to a Medicare for all system would be by far the most efficient program to get into, and it would actually seize some of those complaints about the inefficiencies of the healthcare system.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with you. I think those numbers that you were citing is the current rate for private insurance is at 17% being used for actual healthcare providing.
Yeah,
And it's in Medicare, I think the cost rate of just the administration is 2%. So it's significantly less. It's around 8.5 times less in administrative costs. With that being said, what do you think can be done in our government today and by those watching currently to actually help enact this universal health care reform?
well, the first step would be electing a president who supports it. But in Congress, I would say you need to primary basically every single Democrat who's against it and who's against pretty much all the progressive priorities. And we've seen the rise of Justice Democrats, our revolution, brand new Congress, and helping those candidates succeed. And we have a ton of new candidates coming up in the 2020 election, and that's something that's being overlooked a lot. I feel like because there are a lot of progressives running to get this to get all of these proposals passed. Also, you need a lot of the people supporting. You know, it's going to be more than just a president or a Congress. You need the people backing this proposal, and you're going to have to need people either protesting in the streets, calling their Congress people, doing whatever they can to make sure this gets enacted. Because without the people behind it, it would still be unlikely for Congress to get it passed.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with you that we are overlooking a lot of our congressional races by getting hyper focused on these presidential elections. One of those candidates that we're trying to primary out of office in my own district is Albio Sires, who is an
Yeah, I
enemy
saw
of
that.
Medicare for all. Hector Osagura is the candidate in my district who's running against him, and I think everyone should be looking to try and support candidates beyond just the presidency and getting involved in their communities to help out challengers to all these corporate Democrats. And if,
Mm.
especially if you also are in a red district, don't give up faith. Keep organizing because we're
Mm.
going to need your areas too. And as much as it sounds crazy, Republicans support it too. I think there's been polls that have
Mm.
shown Medicare for all at 51% approval rating for Republicans.
Yeah,
So don't give up hope if you're in a red area. Organize all the same around Medicare for all and universal health care.
yeah. Richard Ojeda was in the reddest district in the country, and he made up like a 49 point deficit in the last election cycle. He ended up losing by like a couple of points, but he was a Democrat running on getting money out of politics and Medicare for all, and he ran against a Republican in West Virginia. It was like a plus 55 Trump district, and he made up like 49 points, and it was the biggest electoral swing in a congressional race. So
Yeah,
it's possible.
Yeah, I strongly agree. We do need to embrace some of these populist policies that aren't necessarily because they're left wing, but simply because they're popular in the country. And I look forward to seeing how Richard Ojeda's seventh run actually goes as well. I
Yeah,
think it's going to be a very interesting run because we have two progressives in that race with him as well as Paula Jean Swearengin in that
yeah.
race as well. So that should be an interesting to watch. But with that being said, I wanted to talk now about your second top priority, which was climate change. Why do you think climate change is a top priority for you specifically? And then, furthermore, what do you think needs to actually be done to address it?
Well, first of all, it's top priority for me because I'm a younger person. Obviously, I'm in college, so um, this is going to be something that impacts me like well throughout my lifetime, as well as future generations. And it's also a top priority just because there are literally catastrophic consequences if action isn't taken. We can't, unfortunately, we can't afford just some like moderate tweaks to our economy to make it more environmental friendly. Like this is going to be require like some massive reforms, even further than like the Paris Agreement or whatever. So it's a top priority because it's like so urgent and it's so pressing and it's going to affect literally every single person on the planet. Um, and the you said how do I get it? How to get it enacted?
No, I was saying, what do you think we need to do to address it?
Oh, what do I think we need to do? Yeah, so like I said, we need giant fundamental reform in terms of the economy and our climate change policy. So it requires just basically um, I support a Green New Deal obviously. I support Bernie, but just transitioning away from fossil fuels as fast as possible. 2030 is the target for most of the progressive candidates. We should definitely be investing in new technology. So I like how Andrew Yang has brought up thorium recently because that's something no one's talking about, and it's cleaner than nuclear, and it's less prone to disaster. So I think that's another thing we should be heavily looking into. I know carbon capture is something that's kind of starting out, but it's not quite there yet. I would like to see where that goes, as well as transitioning, automobiles. And a big thing is investing in public transportation, things like high-speed rail, because those are much more environmentally friendly, as well as um, they're just an easier way for people to get around without the congestion of traffic. I mean, there's smog every day in a lot of big cities from cars. So, a giant high speed rail system and just revamped infrastructure to make it more environmentally friendly are definitely the ways to go.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with a lot of those recommendations that you made. Public transportation is one of my biggest priorities when I was briefly running for Congress myself. It really was a underutilized area of our just economy in general because frankly it's not just a environmentally friendly approach, it's a working class approach, it's a helping the poor
Mm.
approach too. And I think that's one of the things I've always seen with climate change and being able to address it is it's part crisis, but it's part opportunity as well. Do you think that there is going to be sacrifices and we need to say, hey, this is going to economically sacrifice for us? Or is this more of a positive thing as an opportunity for us to change?
Well, I think the negative impacts would mostly come with people who work in the fossil fuel industries, because their jobs, obviously, they're are going to be unsustainable at some point. So transitioning those workers away from their current way of life is definitely an economic sacrifice. And I would say most of the economic impact, aside from what I just said, would lie on the corporations because 100 corporations are responsible. I think it's 70% of global emissions. So, I mean, people they would like it if we, pointed fingers at individual people and what you're doing in your day-to-day life. But at the end of the day, it's a structural problem. It's a corporate problem, first and foremost. So they should be the main focus of the change. But the number one, I would say, sacrifice for ordinary people would be, the transitioning from older, unsustainable jobs towards newer jobs.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. I think it is a mix. I don't think we can say broadly across the board it's going to be positive for everyone in the short term, but it is still a long term goal that we all need to be striving for. One
Yeah,
of
for
the
sure.
things I've heard on the trail so far has been for the people that have been maybe not in the same time window as the Green New Deal, they'll push back saying that we as a country only emit 15% of the emissions. And that if we radically move our energy system to 0% emissions, we're only cutting that and we're potentially harming our economy by going so drastically at that pace. Do you think when we are setting our timelines that we need to be more realistic with the global expectations of transitioning, or do you think that we need to be pursuing zero carbon emissions for our own country as fast as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be doing it as fast as possible, but we also need to bring other countries into the mix. So it is true that we're 15% of global emissions, but the Earth is massive, and 15% is a shit ton of emissions. So that would be a giant. Cutting emissions by 15% globally would be a massive accomplishment. But you're right, it does take other countries in the mix, namely China and India. So. Um, when That's why I think we should be um, talking about this in the international community, like we did with the Paris Agreement, because it, that was a big step forward in terms of bringing the international community together to fight this common cause. And I think if a deal is struck like within the UN with other countries, it should be um, a it should be legally binding, and B there should be much stricter emissions because last time it was just kind of loose guidelines and it wasn't even binding. It was just a suggestion basically. So I would say like ensuring that other countries have are putting in really you know bold goals to hit for in terms of the climate and making it binding would be a good step forward.
Yeah, so I hear you. That Paris Climate Accord was kind of like a resolution in how you were talking about its enforcement mechanisms.
Mm.
One of the things that I've heard on the trail, specifically Andrew Yang had mentioned it, was the idea of as an individual country, instead of working within the multilateral bodies of like a UN, actually exporting and subsidizing the exportation of green technology to other countries, more specifically like Africa, because you're having other countries like China export
Mm.
coal mining facilities to them for their power sources. Do you think that's something that we as a country should do in exporting green technology at cost to other countries?
Yeah, I do think that's a good way to go because, a lot of the developing countries are relying on coal, like you said, and other, non-sustainable technology. So it's basically, which way are they going to pick? If, we don't do anything, then, the Chinese government is basically going to, um, subsidize their economy, and that's not good for their country and economy as a whole, but it's also not good for their environment, especially when they're the ones who are going to be impacted the most by climate change. People in poorer countries are by far going to suffer the worst consequences. So it would be in their best interest as well to export green technology because those countries pretty soon are going to be uh, producing a lot of emissions if green technology is not implemented there, and that's another factor that needs to be taken into consideration when making that kind of decision.
Okay. And so the last thing I wanted to touch on the subject of climate change is what I know we were talking about how we do need this change from a more structural level, a more corporate reform, a more international reform. But sometimes I think a lot of individuals, potentially those that are watching right now, don't know what they can do themselves to be able to actually help us reach that more sustainable economy, more sustainable environment. What do you think are some ways that people here watching can do to actually advocate properly for the climate change to be reversed as well as a clean environment?
So there are a lot of like small things that people can do. The things that we have every day, like recycle more. Don't use as much like plastic bags, or a lot of cities are banning plastic straws and whatnot. So there are smaller things, and I would also give the same answer I did on Medicare for all, is that this is going to require a lot of organizing. It's going to require a lot of activism. It's going to require people putting pressure on public officials to take action because that's the only way a big change like this is going to be able to get done. So I would say those three things would be the most important in terms of getting this passed.
Okay. And so now I want to move kind of into your last topic, although we've kind of mentioned some of it in how we've talked about climate change,
Mm.
which was foreign policy. Why is foreign policy to you so important? How did it become one of your top priorities?
Interestingly, it wasn't that important until this election cycle. Um, so I credit Bernie and Tulsi for putting it, um, kind of on the map in terms of politically, and just realizing how insane not only like our military budget is, but how much we just spend on actual wars. I think it's $4 billion in Afghanistan. We've been for what 18 years. That war started the year I was born. So just seeing not only the economic impact for the U.S., which is obviously terrible. We could have, already funded public college for everyone if we didn't increase the military budget last year. But the impact. This is something I realized more recently is the impact in other countries. I didn't really start like learning more about it until this election cycle, and just seeing and reading the history of the United States in terms of foreign policy and how it's not what we hear in school every like in high school that we're just we're a force for good and we're promoting peace and democracy. No, we're going around toppling democracy and toppling leaders who were democratically elected because we don't like them and they don't serve corporate interests. And as well, not only that, the civilian toll in other countries is horrible. It's not like we're just going in and killing the bad guys. Like we're going in and murdering innocent children and men and women all across the country, and most of them are people of color. So there is giant impacts in pretty much every aspect um, that that this that foreign policy affects. So realizing all of those things and seeing the history of it made me think that this is a really important issue that needs to be addressed. And
Yeah.
also, it's because it's one of the top issues that the president has direct control over. So electing a president who has a good foreign policy is already like that's like half the battle already. That's a giant step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I think even you undersell it just a little bit, just because the Afghanistan war was actually $2 trillion instead of billion. It's really just one of
No,
the biggest cost bloats that we have as a
yeah,
country is
I
these
was saying
wasteful
4 billion
war.
a month, by the
Oh,
way.
4 billion a month. Yeah, that
Yeah.
that that speaks to it strongly.
Oh yeah,
Where
it's
we could
certainly in
be,
the trillions total.
yeah, and I think one of the things when I'm speaking foreign policy with other people, there's always kind of two sides. There's three sides to the coin actually. There's the safety angle, there's the moral angle, and then there's the economic angle. What do you think when you're talking to people who don't have this same, let's call it, anti-interventionist, more peaceful and diplomatic foreign policy? Do you think is the best way to approach them to win over allies to care about a similar foreign policy approach?
In terms of people who don't agree with my foreign policy, I would say economically is number one, and that's not my top priority, but that's what draws a lot of people over, and it's why you see I think Tulsi has one of the highest crossover appeal rates among Republicans, because when she starts talking about the economy and how we're spending a lot of money on wars, this is coming. That's money that's coming out of our tax dollars. It's coming out of our pockets. So that's something that appeals to people who who might consider themselves fiscal conservatives or a libertarian. That's what's going to appeal to them because that's the money that could be going to funding other projects that the country actually needs. So I would say that angle is um, would certainly be my strategy to convincing someone else that we need, a more sane foreign policy.
Mm. In your opinion, do you think there is any specific instances of foreign policy in our world right now that we are not talking about nearly enough?
Hmm. That would be a tough one. I would actually, point to the coup in Bolivia. I mean, that got touched on for maybe 2 days and then people forgot about it. That was, I mean, we literally just toppled the government and we acted like it was a normal Tuesday. So, and for U.S. foreign policy, it is. So that one was definitely not talked about enough. I don't think Kashmir is talked about enough. Kashmir, I should say, and certainly not enough by the presidential candidates. I mean, Iran is basically what's gotten all the media attention because that's what gets the ratings on TV. When people start talking about like a World War III, yeah, that's what's going to get the ratings. Um, but you're not. People are ignoring all of these other foreign policy things all across the globe, and they've ignored the French protests, the Yellow Vest protests, and I know um, we're not personally intervening there, but that's still a global event that people are completely overlooking.
Mm. I strongly agree with you on especially the comments for Bolivia. I think that being a 2 day news cycle and moving on was really a tragedy. And the fact that it didn't get brought up at all during the debate was also just mind boggling because it happened right beforehand. And I also have to say that the French protest, the Yellow Vest protest, is particularly noteworthy that it hasn't gotten attention because if you had this uprising like they've had in their country, in literally any country that the military industrial complex considers a third world nation,
Hmm.
there's regime change happening. I don't agree with it, but that's usually what the United States MO is.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it hasn't gotten any attention nor alliances from any of the candidates, really, even like I don't think anyone's truly full throatedly come out and endorsed like the French protesters. There's been a lot of talk of the
Mm-hmm.
Hong Kong protests for sure. But there's not been a lot when it comes to criticizing our European allies and the behaviors that they've been exhibiting. So I think those
Mm-hmm.
are really important to note. And I also think not just Bolivia itself, but like all of Latin America is another one that we should be talking about
Yeah.
more because of how interconnected it is with our economy and our immigration system as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I strongly agree with you there.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what do you think we need to be doing from a government level as well as from a individual advocate level to really create this reform? Because I know a lot of people who are in these more progressive camps supporting Bernie, Yang, or Tulsi are all like, well, both Democrats and Republicans are kind of supporting this behavior. So, what do you think can be done to actually create reform on this subject?
Right. So, before we get the chance to elect, a new president, it's tough on the personal level because this is something that's, really influenced by the executive branch. But I'm hoping that Congress, will be able to take the steps necessary to prevent, foreign policy blunders like Iran from happening. We saw what happened with, Saudi Arabia, after they, killed the journalist. There was a bill that was introduced to, I think it was stop giving aid. Was it aid to Saudi Arabia? No, it was. I'm sorry. It was to stop allowing the U.S. support of the Saudi Arabian genocide in Yemen, and that got vetoed, unfortunately, even though it passed the House and the Senate. So, it's definitely we got to make sure that the people in Congress, particularly progressives, are making this a top priority because otherwise it's going to go completely under the radar, like we've seen all the other news cycles, or the non-news cycles about global foreign policy events. So we need to make sure that this is being put front and center, so that it's brought to people's attention, so they can then pressure people in Congress to, kind of force uh, the president and the executive branch's hand in terms of foreign policy. But aside from that, just electing someone with good foreign policy would be a good thing to have.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with you there. I think it's honestly embarrassing that we're having Trump's impeachment over the things that we have instead of the fact that
Mm,
he did the veto of exactly that, stopping the genocide in Yemen, and that we were trying to just reinforce
mm,
existing law of the War Powers Act and our constitutional duty, and
exactly.
he just said, nope, vetoed. Like
Right
that,
after
you would,
we reinstated the Patriot Act, by the way.
yeah,
Right
exactly.
after we put the Patriot Act back in.
And yet, we basically, if you had followed the impeachment coverage, I know Adam Schiff, in his pontification of why it was such an egregious offense of him taking the military aid from Ukraine in that situation, is that it was challenging the basic military industrial complex of why are we sending all this aid over there. So there
Yeah.
is definitely this concerted effort to keep this going, and it does need a lot of underlying reform to just
Mm,
take back control from the executive branch and put that
yeah.
power back into Congress so that, well, when it's in Congress, it gets the subjects get discussed more out in
Yeah.
public, and people have to take open positions of do I support war or not? And I think that just brings more transparency to what officials are pro war and which aren't. So I think the War
Yeah.
Powers Resolution is a really strong thing that we need to be fighting for. So I strongly agree with you on that, John.
Yeah. Can I
But
just
yeah, go ahead.
just real quick on the impeachment thing? The funniest thing I found was that the Democrats, the corporate Democrats, they were spending all their time not talking about, healthcare, climate change, or whatever. They were spending all their time lobbying John Bolton to testify in front of Congress. Like this is someone who should literally be in The Hague, and he's like their savior. Like they want nothing more than John Bolton to testify to Congress about Donald Trump because they just have such a strong hatred of Donald Trump. They don't care that this guy has, the blood of thousands of people on his hands. And, the woke white neoliberals, made John Bolton's book like the number 6 bestseller on Amazon
Yeah,
or something like that. It's like
that's
his book
sad.
is on a war criminal's book is a top 10 bestseller right now.
Yeah, that is
Because he
very
happens to
freaking
be
sad.
against the president now because he got fired.
Like he didn't even just testify. Like we didn't have the witnesses for that.
Yeah,
Although I will admit, I'm kind of satisfied that they didn't get witnesses because
me too.
frankly, we know what the score was going to be anyway. We knew this impeachment is going to fail, not
Exactly.
because of the merits of the case, but because it is a political process itself. And so the fact that they didn't call witnesses at least shows that the Republicans are not playing fair and that we have a chance to make that argument compared to if they
Yeah,
did let witnesses, they could still then just vote it down anyway and say, "Oh, look, we
exactly.
ran a fair trial." So I
I think
think
it
it's
would.
actually a good thing that we ended up not getting
Yeah, I think it
witnesses.
would have been better for the Republicans if they had witnesses and then voted it down, because then voted the trial down after witnesses, because you're forcing the Democratic candidates who are in the Senate, most mainly Bernie, Warren, and Klobuchar, off of the campaign trail. I'm glad that's one of the reasons I'm glad that's over because they've been stuck in Washington for a week and a half. And you could say, hey, look, we had all the evidence out there, and Donald Trump was still acquitted. But now, there are Senate people in the Senate who are running for re-election who have to go back to their home districts with low approval ratings already and explain why they voted, against witnesses in a trial. So it could end up, working out better this way. So I was actually glad that the witnesses got voted down.
Yeah, especially when I was fully expecting that Trump's approval rating would go up from being acquitted, them kind of bungling it to just say, you know what, we're already corrupt and we'll do whatever it takes to gain power, so we'll just not have witnesses. But in the end, I think it's going to just really lower that approval rating that they could have gained from by saying, hey, these Democrats are just trying to not focus on the issues and just try and play politics. Well, hello, you just played some major politics to just not even have a fair trial. But with that being said, I want to thank you, John, for being able to come on today to be able to talk about your top priorities, being able to talk about Medicare for all, climate change, and foreign policy. But before we go, I want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything that you want to let the Rosebuds out there know that you got going on or that they should go check out?
Um, I would. So I host a show, Outsider Report. So go check that on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Outside Report. And yeah, that's about it. I don't have much else to plug here. But thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun. Had a lot talking about the issues. And good luck with your stuff going on.
Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you coming back onto the show to be able to talk about your top priorities. But before we end today's episode, I want to let the folks out there know a little bit about what we have going on. You can all check out some of the other episodes we've had in our new Daily Priority series that have occurred. We had Adam Smith as well as Brennan Medlock, who are coming out with episodes at a similar time as John. And we had our past episodes with Cody Hill and Marcus Kassler that you all should go check out. Furthermore, if you want to join an episode of the Daily Priority so that you could talk about your top political priorities, there's going to be a sign-up sheet down below that you can check out that'll also tell you what you can sign up for in the future. We have other debates as well, so the panels are not completely gone, but I am enjoying these new one-on-one interview formats. We also have our cheat sheet, which is going to have all of the things under the sun that we do at the Hill of Roses for you to check out. And we're going to have our open source policy so that whenever we don't have guests on to be able to talk to, we can go through and analyze some of the policy recommendations you all made that were adaptations on my original policy platform. It went from 8 pages all the way to 22 so far, so I'm looking forward to being able to do that review next week. With that being said, comment down below, Rosebuds, of what you thought about today's episode, as well as who you'd like to see come on next time and be able to chat on the Daily Priority. Until next time, my friends, stay rosy.